When was the last time you intentionally stopped to remember what God has already carried you through? My name is Naomi Wells, and I'm the founder of Wells Devotionals. I spend much of my time helping individuals and families create rhythms that keep faith grounded in everyday life, deeply rooted and lived out over time. Today's episode is about writing down God's faithfulness and the idea of creating a family testimony book. This isn't about crafting something polished or impressive, but more about paying attention. It's about noticing the moments where God has been present, faithful and kind, and choosing not to let those moments quietly slip away. Whether you live in a busy household, share life with a spouse, parent on your own, or walk your faith journey without children, this practice matters. Remembering God's work strengthens faith in the present and steadies us for what lies ahead. Remembering is a spiritual discipline. It requires intention. Life moves quickly and days fill themselves without asking permission. If we are not careful, meaningful moments with God can fade into the background, not because they were small, but because we never paused long enough to hold on to them. In Scripture, God repeatedly calls his people to remember. This call is not rooted in nostalgia, it is rooted in faithfulness. Remembering what God has done anchors us. It gives context to our prayers and perspective to our waiting. In the book of Deuteronomy, Moses speaks to the people of Israel as they stand on the edge of a new season. They are preparing to enter the land promised to them, and before they move forward, they are reminded to look back with care and attention. Moses says, "Only be careful and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things which your eyes saw, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. But make them known to your children and your children's children." Deuteronomy 4 verse 9. This verse carries both a warning and a gift. Forgetting is presented as a real possibility, even after seeing God work with their own eyes. Memory is not automatic, it must be guarded, it must be tended. Notice that remembering here is not passive. It involves the heart, the soul, and intentional action. What God has done is meant to stay close, not drift away with time. And remembrance is not meant to stop with one person, it is meant to be shared. Writing is one of the ways we keep memory close. When we write down answered prayers, moments of provision, unexpected peace, or quiet guidance, we slow ourselves enough to see the thread of God's faithfulness woven through ordinary days. A family testimony book does not require perfect words. It does not need chronological order or theological depth. It simply needs your honesty and attention. A sentence, a date, a short paragraph that says, "God met us here." For those with children, this becomes a gift that grows over time. For those without children, it still becomes a record of God's work that can strengthen your own faith in seasons when memory feels fragile. There are days when faith feels strong and clear. There are days when it feels tired and stretched. Written remembrance becomes a steady witness that speaks even when emotions fluctuate. Moses urged the people to make these things known to the next generation, but that begins with first knowing them ourselves. Writing helps us name what our eyes have seen and what our hearts have experienced. As we move forward in this episode, we will explore how testimonies shape future faith, how they connect generations, and how writing itself becomes an act of worship. For now, consider this simple question. What is one thing God has done in your life that deserves to be remembered on purpose? Testimonies are not meant to stay private. They are meant to be spoken, shared, and passed along. When we tell the story of what God has done, something shifts, not only in the listener, but also in us. Faith is strengthened through hearing, and courage often grows through remembrance that is spoken aloud. A testimony does not need to be dramatic to be powerful. It can be quiet and steady. It can sound like provision arriving at the right time, peace settling in the middle of uncertainty, or wisdom given when direction felt unclear. When these stories are told, they remind us that God is active and present, working in ways both seen and unseen. The book of Psalms invites God's people into this outward expression of gratitude and witness. It calls us to speak, to declare, and to make known what God has done. Psalm 105 verse 1 and 2 say, Give thanks to the Lord, call on his name, make his deeds known among the peoples. Sing to him, sing praises to him, tell of all his marvellous works. There is movement in this passage. Giving thanks leads to calling on God's name. Calling leads to telling. Telling leads to praise. Testimony becomes a living part of worship. It is not reserved for public platforms or formal settings. It belongs in homes, conversations, journals, and shared memories. When families record testimonies, they create a shared language of faith. Children and adults alike begin to recognize patterns of God's faithfulness. They learn that prayer connects to real life. They learn that waiting has purpose. They learn that God's work continues beyond a single moment. Even for those who do not live in traditional family structure, testimonies still shape future faith. Friends, communities, churches, and even our own future self become recipients of those written and spoken stories. There may come a time when you need to hear again what God has already carried you through. Scripture also shows us that testimony holds spiritual weight. In the book of Revelation, we are reminded that words of truth spoken in faith carry real power. Speaking of those who remain faithful, the scripture says in Revelation 12 verse 11, "They overcame him because of the Lamb's blood, and because of the word of their testimony. They did not love their life, even to death." This verse reveals that testimony works alongside what Christ has already accomplished. The work of Jesus stands complete, and our testimony becomes a response to that victory. When believers speak what God has done, faith is reinforced and strengthened. Writing testimonies down allows those words to continue speaking long after the moment has passed. A family testimony book becomes a quiet but steady voice that reminds readers where hope has already taken root. There may be seasons when faith feels stretched. There may be questions without immediate answers. In those moments, testimonies serve as markers. They say, God has been faithful here. God has met us before. God's work continues. Encouragement grows when stories are shared. Faith becomes less isolated and more communal. Testimony reminds us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, a story that God continues to write across generations and seasons. Faith is never meant to exist in isolation. Scripture presents it as something that moves, something that travels from one life to another. What we choose to remember and record today becomes part of the spiritual environment that others will one day step into. When we write down testimonies, we are not only preserving moments, we are shaping understanding. We are giving language to faith and offering future generations a window into how God has worked in real lives through ordinary people across changing seasons. The Psalms speak directly to this movement of faith from one generation to the next. They describe praise as something that has been passed along, not stored away. Psalm 145 verse 4 says, "One generation will praise your works to another, and will declare your mighty acts." This verse reflects a rhythm. Praise is learned. It is heard before it is spoken. It is modelled before it is practiced. When children or younger believers hear story of God's faithfulness, they begin to understand that faith is not abstract, it is lived. Recording generational blessings does not mean that every story is easy or joyful. It means that God's presence was real in the midst of those moments. Written testimonies hold space for honesty, gratitude, and trust. They show that faith remains steady through change. A family testimony book can include stories of provision, healing, direction, restoration, and growth. It can also include seasons of waiting and learning. Over time, these stories create a spiritual legacy that speaks clearly and gently. For families with children, these written records offer something tangible. They allow children to see how prayer connects to life. They show that faith has roots that reach further back than their own experiences. This builds confidence and continuity. For those without children, generational impact still matters. Friends, mentees, spiritual family, and future relationships may one day encounter your written testimony. Your faithfulness in recording God's work becomes a gift that continues beyond your immediate circle. Writing helps us slow down enough to recognize blessing. It trains our hearts to notice how God's guidance and provision appear across time, not always in dramatic moments, but often in a steady presence. When one generation declares God's work to another, faith becomes shared ground. It creates connection, it invites trust. It reminds us that we are part of an ongoing story shaped by God's faithfulness. As we continue, we will turn our attention to moments that mark seasons and transitions. These moments remind us that God's help carries us forward. There are moments in life that stand out as markers. Seasons where something shifted, a challenge that was overcome, a turning point that quietly changed direction. Scripture shows us that God's people often mark those moments, not to glorify the event itself, but to remember who carried them through it. In the Old Testament, these markers were sometimes physical. Stones were set up, altars were built, names were given to places so that memory would remain clear. These were not empty rituals, these were intentional reminders of God's help. In the book of 1 Samuel, the prophet Samuel set up such a marker after God delivers Israel from their enemies. Scripture records this moment with care. In 1 Samuel 7 verse 12 it says, "Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shane, and called its name Ebenezer, saying, 'The Lord helped us until now.'" This statement holds deep meaning. It acknowledges help has already been given while standing in the present moment. It recognises God's faithfulness through what has already unfolded. Writing down testimonies functions in a similar way. Each written account becomes an Ebenezer. It marks a place in time where God's help was clear. It says, "We were here and God met us here." Life moves through seasons that do not always look the same. There are times of growth and times of waiting. There are moments of clarity and moments of uncertainty. Recording God's faithfulness through each season allows us to see continuity, even when circumstances change. A family testimony book can hold these markers gently. Pages may reflect seasons of joy, transition, loss, renewal, and provision. Over time, the collection tells a story that no single moment could capture on its own. These written markers also help us speak truth during future seasons. When challenges arise, past testimonies remind us that help has already been given before. They become a steady reference point that ground faith. For families, these markers offer shared memory. They allow conversations to begin. They invite reflection. They may help younger members understand that faith has history and depth. For individuals, written markers provide reassurance. They offer perspective. They remind us that God's faithful love continues across seasons, not limited by circumstance or time. Samuel named the stone as a way of saying something aloud that mattered. Writing does the same. It gives language to gratitude. It creates space for acknowledgement. It allows us to pause and recognise the help that has carried us this far. So up to this point, we have been talking about remembering, marking, and recognising what God has done. Here we will turn our attention to the act of writing itself and why it holds such spiritual weight. Writing is not simply a method for storing memories. It becomes a way of responding to God with intention and care. When we write down testimonies, we are choosing to pause. We are choosing to give space to what God has done, rather than allowing it to pass quietly into the background of busy days. This pause shapes our attention. It trains us to notice God's presence within ordinary life. A family testimony book is a shared place where those moments are gathered. It is a written record of how God has been involved in daily decisions, prayers, relationship, challenges, and growth. It holds stories that reflect real life rather than polished outcomes. These stories might include a prayer that was answered after patience or persistence, guidance received during an uncertain decision, provision that arrived at the right moment, or peace experienced during a difficult season. Writing allows these experiences to be named clearly and remembered with care. As a family practice, testimony writing can become a gentle rhythm. Some families choose a regular time, such as once a week or once a month, to reflect together. During that time, each person can be invited to share something they noticed God doing. This may be spoken aloud before it is written down. Children often engage best through storytelling and creativity. They may describe what happened in their own words, and an adult can write that alongside their name and date. Younger children may draw pictures that represent the experience. Parents can add a short explanation underneath the drawing, capturing the child's perspective and the moment itself. Older children may enjoy writing their own entries. These entries do not need to follow a strict structure. Some families choose to prompt gently with questions such as, "Where did you notice God helping this week?" or "What are you thankful for right now?" Over time, these shared reflections build confidence and spiritual awareness. For families with varied schedules, testimony writing can also happen as the moments arise. A short entry written after a meaningful conversation, a prayer answered, or a significant change can be added whenever it feels appropriate. The value lies in consistency over time, rather than the frequency alone. For individuals, testimony writing offers a quiet and steady practice. It may take place during prayer, journaling, or moments of reflection. Writing allows thoughts to settle and meaning to emerge. It provides a place to reflect honestly on how God has been present across different seasons. As entries accumulate, patterns begin to appear. Guidance, provision, and growth become easier to recognize. These patterns strengthen faith by showing that God's involvement is not limited to isolated moments. They reveal continuity and care. Writing also supports faith during seasons of waiting. When answers feel distant, writing helps keep attention focused and hope engaged. It provides a place to acknowledge trust while time unfolds. In Isaiah 40 verse 31, this kind of waiting and renewal is shown. "But those who wait for the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint." Writing during waiting seasons allows faith to remain active. It gives shape to patience and reminds us strength grows through trust. Over time, these written reflections become reminders of endurance and growth. A testimony book develops gradually, and gradual growth matters. Faith deepens through repeated attention and shared reflection. Writing across months and years allows understanding to mature. Early entries may capture simple moments. Later entries often reflect greater insight and confidence. This steady accumulation builds cohesion within families. It creates shared memory and shared language around faith. It helps children and adults alike recognize God's faithfulness stretches across time. Writing as obedience and worship aligns attention with what God has already done. It creates a practice that steadies the heart and anchors faith in lived experience. The book itself becomes a quiet witness, shaped by gratitude, trust, and intention. And as we come to the final chapter today, we will reflect on how these written testimonies extend beyond the present and form a lasting legacy that continues to speak into the future. Legacy is something that is formed quietly through everyday faithfulness. A family testimony book becomes part of that legacy. It carries stories forward, holding them in a way that words spoken once cannot always do. Stories shape understanding. They teach us what matters. When faith is recorded in words, drawings, dates, and reflections, it becomes accessible beyond the moment it was first experienced. A testimony book gathers these moments and gives them continuity. Scripture reminds us God's work is abundant and ongoing. Near the end of the Gospel of John, we are given a glimpse of the sheer breadth of Jesus' works. The writer reflects on what could be recorded and what remains beyond pages. In John 21 verse 25, "There are also many other things which Jesus did, which if they would all be written, I suppose that even the world itself wouldn't have room for the books that would be written." This verse reminds us that God's work extends far beyond what can be captured in writing. Yet Scripture itself is written so that we might know, remember, and believe. Writing does not attempt to contain everything God's done. It seeks to witness faithfully to what we have seen and experienced. A family testimony book does exactly that. It does not aim to be comprehensive. It aims to be faithful. It records what mattered, what shaped faith, and what revealed God's presence in real life. These written stories may be read years later. A child may return to them as an adult. A family member may open the book during a season of change. An individual may reread earlier entries during a time that requires reassurance and perspective. In each case, the stories continue to speak. Legacy forms through repetition and attention. When families write testimonies together, they are practicing faith in a way that is visible and shared. When individuals write faithfully over time, they are creating a record that strengthens understanding and trust. This legacy is not built through pressure or performance. It grows through consistency and care. Each entry contributes to a larger story that reflects God's faithfulness across seasons. A testimony book also teaches discernment. It helps families and individuals recognize how God works differently in different seasons. It shows how faith adapts, matures, and deepens with time. This awareness brings confidence and steadiness. And as this episode closes, the invitation is simple. Pay attention. Notice where God is present. Take time to write down those moments. Allow them to shape faith and understanding. If writing feels unfamiliar, begin gently. A sentence, a short paragraph, a drawing, a date. Over time, these small acts become something lasting. Next Tuesday, we'll continue this conversation as we explore journaling as worship and how words and art can work together as a spiritual practice. We will look at how creativity and reflection can deepen attentiveness and expression in faith. For now, let today's focus rest on remembrance and legacy. Stories matter. Written testimonies matter. They carry faith forward with care and intention. And until next time, stay rooted.